built by a boat builder who had been building during the early 1900s in the style that was like the workboats that had been built to dredge oysters in the Chesapeake Bay, specifically over on the eastern shore in the Choptank River. It doesn't have a lot of the modern gear that a fiberglass sailboat has. It has no winches. They would not have had winches on a skipjack. It has a different kind of rigging. It has, instead of turnbuckles, it has lanyards and dead eyes. So it looks very much like a 19th century boat. The attractiveness of that to me was that it was not a typical fiberglass boat that's fairly ubiquitous. It was a vernacular vessel. It was built like the vernacular vessels that were used as workboats in the Chesapeake Bay. And as a two-masted vessel, it also had an attraction in that it was a lower aspect rig, which presented different sail combinations than we normally see on a modern fiberglass sloop, which have been a continual source of interest and experimentation. We can sail with just the mainsail and the jib, that it's different from the boats that I sailed on here in the bay, raced on during the 80s and 90s. It's an icon of the Chesapeake Bay. It's a historic precursor of the state boat, the skipjack. It has a lot of the representations of the boats that have the traditional appeal that a lot of people associate with the Chesapeake Bay. It has raked masts. It has carved trail boards, gilded. It has stern boards that are carved. It has a long head that has the long sweep in front of the overhanging bowsprit. So it has a lot of interesting looking features. It has a lot of juice. And we have a full cabin, so we're bending the rule there a little bit, but it still has a workboat aesthetic. It does not look like a passenger vessel. When you go onto the Jolly Dolphin, the aroma that comes from down below is striking. There's a smell of cedar and wood that is really quite enriching. When we saw the boat in 2007, and I'd been looking for a project like this for a while, a wooden boat, preferably not a sloop, so I'd have some ability to understand what it was like to sail a different boat. A couple of things made it possible for us to undertake this. The biggest feature was that there is a museum in Cambridge to the man who built the boat, the Richardson Maritime Museum. And they have a bunch of retirees who volunteer at the museum to do a variety of projects. About the time I got the boat and was introduced to the museum and the staff at the museum, they were working on restoring an old drake tail fisherman's boat. And they agreed that they would like to work on rebuilding the boat. There was an old boat builder there who'd come up from Hooper's Island, Mac, and he first said to me, you know, what we should do is turn the boat over and put a new bottom on it. We replaced the inner stem.
This is the original stem that we took out of the Jolly Dolphin when we started replanking the bottom.
And that replanking went on until the spring of 2010, and then we turned the boat over in the spring of 2010. At that point we added some new deck beams just to keep things stable back aft. We put the rebuilt engine, different from the one that came originally. We had the new transom, we had the new centerboard that we had built. So we got to the end of that, and that's when we brought the boat back up here to the Magathy, and that's when the second phase of all of this started.
Hey Jack, she's floating!
When the boat came back up here, it was all topsides work. Topsides planking were all finished, so it was from the deck up. And the plan there was to replace all the deck beams because they'd been worked on over the years, and some of them were showing a lot of rot. Some of it had been redone. It was all a plywood deck that had fiberglass on it. So I put a canvas down in tight bond glue and painted over it. So it's a traditional canvas deck. that you might have seen in the 50s. And the cabin's 17 feet long, so there's a long carlin on each side of the cabin under the cabin side. The cabin side had been built up of bread and butter cedar siding, about 1.5 inches thick, laid with white lead between the pieces. But inside that, he had put up a cedar paneling, which trapped the condensation and the moisture between this varnished panel inside and the structure of the cabin. So the structure of the cabin had deteriorated and had been patched over the years. So all that went away. But I didn't just get rid of it all. I had to do the deck beams. Cabin sides came off, but I kept the cabin top and the deck and the overhead beams in place when I did all the work below that on the deck. The other main feature that contributed to this idea of a vernacular vessel, which is something that's fascinated me through architecture and my studies and profession, is that it evolved in the bay with certain conditions in the bay that we had to accommodate. It has a shallow draft. It only draws 2.5 feet, and it has a centerboard so that when we're out in the part of the bay where we can use that lateral stability, we can drop the centerboard down in about 5 feet below that so that we have about a 7-foot draft with the board down. It's not the most efficient of boats, but because it has a centerboard, we can go into the very shallow creeks and all that, as we were talking before about the boats that would go in and out of the various landings on the bay, certainly Robinson's here in the Magathie River area. So that evolution of the boat to suit the conditions, the geography, is something that is, I think, being lost. When we see typical aluminum-masted sloop that could be in San Francisco, it could be in the Magathie River, it could be in New England, there's a certain sameness to all of that. So preserving something that is specific to the bay, the Magathie, all the little creeks and inlets in the estuary is really what captured me. We can get to take youngsters to something that is unique and handmade and has a reflection of generations of people who helped this style boat evolve, that it would help bring your mindset back to another time. So it's a cultural artifact to me of that slice of time.